The Mediterranean Sea, once a cradle of civilization, has become a watery graveyard. Thousands of migrants fleeing conflict and poverty drown each year attempting to cross from North Africa to Europe. Italy, a country on the front line of this crisis, has faced a surge in arrivals. Desperate to stem the flow, it has struck a controversial deal with Libya, funding and training the Libyan Coast Guard to intercept migrant boats. This deal, however, comes at a heavy price. Libya, plagued by instability and violence since the 2011 uprising, is notorious for its human rights abuses. Migrant detention centers, rife with torture, extortion and slavery, have become synonymous with inhumane conditions. Italy's partnership with Libya raises serious questions about its commitment to human rights. Critics argue that Italy is outsourcing its responsibilities and turning a blind eye to systematic abuse. The deal, they say, is a Faustian bargain, trading human dignity for border control. The recent arrest and release of Osama Njim, a high-ranking Libyan official accused of crimes against humanity, has thrown this controversial agreement into sharp relief. Njim's case has sparked outrage, highlighting the dark underbelly of Italy's migration policy and exposing the human cost of its desperate attempts to control its borders. Osama Njim, known as al-Masri, is no ordinary bureaucrat. As Libya's chief of judicial police, he held sway over a network of detention centers notorious for their brutality. For years, human rights groups have documented the horrors within these facilities. Torture, rape, extortion, and forced labor are commonplace. Njim, they allege, was not a passive observer, but an active participant in this system of abuse. In January 2025, Njim was arrested in Italy on an international criminal court warrant. The charges were chilling: crimes against humanity and war crimes, including murder, torture, rape, and sexual violence. The ICC accused him of overseeing a reign of terror in Tripoli's detention centers, where migrants were routinely subjected to unimaginable suffering. His arrest sent shockwaves through the international community and raised hopes of justice for the countless victims who had suffered under his watch. However, those hopes were short-lived. In a move that stunned observers, Italian authorities released Njim just 2 days later, citing inaccuracies in the ICC warrant. The decision sparked outrage, with human rights groups accusing Italy of prioritizing political expediency over justice. Njim's release, they argued, sent a message of impunity to perpetrators of abuse and betrayed the victims who had dared to speak out. The walls of Libya's detention centers may be concrete and steel, but they cannot silence the cries of the tortured or erase the memories of those who have witnessed unimaginable horrors. David Yambio and Lam Magok, 2 former detainees, have come forward with harrowing accounts of abuse they say they witnessed at the hands of Osama Njim. Yambio, his voice trembling with emotion, described seeing Njim personally beating prisoners with metal pipes and pistol handles. He alleges that Njim forced detainees into slave labor, exploiting their desperation for profit. Most chillingly, Yambio claims to have witnessed Njim killing people, his actions a brutal reminder of the power he wielded within the detention center walls. Magok's testimony corroborates Yambio's claims, painting a grim picture of life inside the Mitiga detention center. He describes beatings, torture, and killings. His words are a stark reminder of the human cost of Italy's migration policy. Magok alleges that migrants were forced to dispose of bodies, their silence bought with the threat of violence. Their accounts are not isolated incidents. Another witness, speaking anonymously on Italian state television, claimed that Njim killed prisoners to instill fear, his brutality a calculated tool to maintain control. These testimonies, though difficult to hear, provide a glimpse into the heart of darkness that lies at the center of Libya's migrant detention system. Section 4. Funding the gatekeepers, Italy's controversial support of the Libyan Coast Guard. Italy's involvement in Libya's migrant crisis extends far beyond diplomatic agreements. It has poured millions of euros into funding and training the Libyan Coast Guard, the very force responsible for intercepting migrant boats in the Mediterranean. While Italy argues that this support is crucial to saving lives at sea, critics contend that it makes Italy complicit in the human rights abuses that occur once migrants are returned to Libya. The Libyan Coast Guard has been repeatedly accused of reckless and violent behavior, with reports of its officers firing on migrant boats and abandoning people at sea. Those intercepted are often returned to the same detention centers where torture, extortion and forced labor are rife. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International and other organizations have documented these abuses extensively, raising serious concerns about Italy's continued support for the Libyan Coast Guard. By funding and equipping a force with a documented history of human rights violations, Italy is effectively outsourcing its border control to a country with a shaky human rights record. This policy, critics argue, allows Italy to claim it is upholding its international obligations while turning a blind eye to the suffering of those intercepted and returned to Libya. Section 5. Turning a blind eye. Italy's migration policy under scrutiny. Italy's decision to release Osama Njim ignited a firestorm of controversy, shining a spotlight on the country's increasingly hardline stance on migration. The current government, led by Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, came to power on a platform that prioritized border security and reducing migrant arrivals. Meloni's government has revived the Mattei Plan, a strategy aimed at forging energy partnerships with African states in exchange for their cooperation in stemming the flow of migrants. While the plan is touted as a mutually beneficial solution, critics argue that it risks further empowering authoritarian regimes and overlooks the root causes of migration. The release of Njim, coupled with Italy's continued support for the Libyan Coast Guard, has drawn sharp criticism from human rights groups, opposition politicians and international observers. They argue that Italy is prioritizing its own political interests over its human rights obligations, sacrificing the well-being of vulnerable people in the pursuit of border security. The political fallout from Njim's release has been swift and significant. Former Prime Minister Matteo Renzi accused the government of hypocrisy, while Meloni herself is facing calls for her resignation and a potential investigation into her role in Njim's release. The controversy has exposed the deep divisions within Italian society over migration, highlighting the ethical complexities of balancing border control with human rights.